Welcome. Come join me as we explore the secret realms of audio fame where true magic occurs away from the spotlight. This episode unveils the genius who shapes the limelight rather than basking in it. But more about our CEO of Workhouse Media, Paul Anderson, in just a moment. Welcome to the Dov Baron Show, where the world's pulse meets the power of insight. Come for the stories, stay for the learning. For 16 years, we've journeyed with you, guiding the biggest minds and the most profound thinkers. Now, we've elevated this adventure, merging the best of the Leadership and Loyalty podcast with the Curiosity Bites podcast, and we present you with a single odyssey of enlightenment we call the Dov Baron Show. To join our vibrant community, just hit the subscribe button. It really matters and it really makes a difference, and you become part of a global movement. We'll dive into episodes brimming with wisdom from global leaders, scientists, entertainers, philosophers, theologians, journalists, with astronauts who've traveled the vastness of space, philosophers who are harvesting the intricacies of the human spirit, and even presidential candidates trying to make sense of a world on the brink. We'll explore it all on the Dov Baron Show. This is more than a podcast. I hope it is for you too. And this is your passport to unparalleled insights. This week, we welcome a guest whose story will captivate and inspire. Picture a world where podcasting perfection reigns supreme. Each episode is a masterpiece of audio storytelling, meticulously crafted by unsung heroes. But who are these magicians? And more importantly, who places them in the realm of enchantment where they can actually do their very, very best? Today, we are going to dive into that realm with an extraordinary tale of a man whose eyes and ears for talent and negotiation skills have transformed talent into household names. Prepare to meet the ultimate backstage maestro, an architect of icons like Dan Patrick, Ricky Smiley, Shonda Rhimes, the unforgettable Bob Saget, and Hall of Famers Bob Rivers. And I realize that some of this is going to go into areas you've not thought about before because it is behind the scenes. But it really is a journey into the shadows of stardom where this mastermind weaves the narrative that shapes destinies, and a riveting account of a man who doesn't just create stars, but he forges legends. Paul Anderson has traveled a long and winding road from lawyer to CEO, venture capitalist, talent agent, real estate developer, and producer. Today, Paul is the CEO of Workhouse Media, a leading audio-first multi-platform talent and content management company. Paul has clients and partnerships across radio, podcasting, television, digital media, aside from representing some of the biggest talent in the industry. He's produced award-winning podcasts, including The Letter, Aftershock, including Cold, Solar, and several others. He has won 2 Telly Awards for marketing campaigns he produced for Microsoft and produced a movie called 2 Weeks with Sally Field. He's a partner of venture capital firm, and he's a principal owner of a real estate development company with properties in 5 states. He's a board member for Go Kids Go, podcast company focused on content for kids. Ladies and gentlemen, please turn up the volume and help me welcome Paul Anderson. Good to have you here, mate.
Wow, that guy sounds impressive, wherever that is, but I'm afraid you're stuck with me today, Dov.
I'll go with that. I'll be okay. Listen, I know you don't do a lot of podcasts, and I feel like I'm very grateful and honored that you are willing to be here with us for this show. What is really interesting to me about it is that you're the guy behind the scenes in so many of these things. And as I said in the intro, 99.9% of our listeners have probably never heard of you, for that matter, never heard of Workhouse Media. But you guys have been making some very big things happen for a long time. Tell us what it's like to be behind the scenes for those in the spotlight. I think it's a really interesting question because you constantly take the back seat as other people take that spotlight.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on as a guest. This is actually only the second long-form interview I've ever granted in the decades I've been running this company. There are people who do what I do for a living who like to be more in the foreground. They like to be at least the second moniker on announcements. But I have built my business and career understanding that our job is to really help buttress and support the media strategy and the deals with the talent we work with. So they're the ones in the limelight. They're the ones who are the household names, not me and not the senior executives on my team. But to answer your question, I love dealing with really curious, smart people who have high emotional intelligence and who understand how to capture and maintain an audience. And that is not easy. That is not easy to do. So I marvel at people like you who actually know how to communicate with people and have great media training and media savvy, but also a level of transparency and sort of, I would call it radical candor and forthright honesty about what it is to communicate with people and have actually impact them. You and I both know, Dove, that people remember storytelling. Mm-hmm. That's what they remember. You could come on here and talk about facts and metrics. No one's going to remember any of that. You could talk about your hundreds of thousands of downloads or millions of fans or whatever. No one really cares about that. But you can tell a story about your childhood. You can tell a story about how you met someone in a serendipitous situation, and they will remember that, and that will have emotive impact on them. And I love supporting my talent and our partners across our shows so that they have an audience to consume their story. But I'm not the story. I'm the business story.
Yeah, but that is an important story. I'll give you a great example. You watch America's Got Talent or American Idol or one of those things. I used to love to listen to the auditions. And some of these people were so freaking talented, it would bring tears to my eyes. And I can remember when people used to say to me, why do you cry when you watch that? And I said, it's because I know there are so many people who are famous who are less talented than these people. And these people have walked onto the stage and they've put it all right there. I mean, they have potentially put themselves out for a massive amount of ridicule, and they've given everything they've got to be that raw so that somebody can see them and recognize that talent. I think that takes extraordinary courage. But these people are unknown until that moment. You can love or hate someone like Simon Cowell, but without that ability to recognize that talent, these people just fade into oblivion. And that's what I really appreciate about you, because your journey, and I said that at the beginning, we're going to go into it in a moment, but that journey from being a lawyer all the way through to being this guy behind these talents, for me, is very, very fascinating. And that's why I'm intrigued to ask you about what is it like, because what I'm looking at is, in some ways, you're kind of the, what's that term? The midwife for this talent. That's why I'm asking you that, because you're
well, I've never heard the term midwife in connection with what I do, but I think that it's really the creation of others, and then hopefully me helping and adding media strategy and some business savvy around their native talents to get it to an audience. Because ultimately, if you don't have an audience, you don't really have an audience. And so I think it's really a great symbiotic relationship between the talent, who are extraordinary at doing what they do and can hold a room. And you're right. Anytime a talent puts themselves out there, they're making themselves vulnerable. Yeah. Me as a guest on your show makes me a talent for the moment in the Dove Barron show. But I'm not here to entertain people the same way. I'm just here to be myself. Yes. But a lot of people do really well by just being themselves and their personality, and they hold and capture and maintain audience. And ultimately that can be accretive to their bottom lines by creating a business around it. And so it's great. I love it. I'm energized by people's passions. Right. And I'm also super curious how people have and apply their wares to a vulnerable situation, whether you're an actor or a director, because you're putting yourself out there, whether you're a broadcast personality or a podcast personality. I like it. I love it. But I don't want to be the podcaster. Today, I'm your guest. And again, this is only the second long-form interview I've ever done. I'm beginning to think that maybe somebody might be interested in what I have to say around the business that I've worked in. And my background is very different. I started out in criminal law, and that evolved my career. And one of the things I've learned as I've gotten maybe a little wiser, a little more experienced, is that me being a little more vulnerable about my process and what I think about and what makes me tick actually is helpful to other people. And so I'm beginning to accept that maybe I have something to add to people's lives where I am the behind the scenes guy, but it is part of the symbiotic relationship with the talent.
I really appreciate that. Like I said, there's this journey. As you said, you started out as a lawyer. I can't imagine as a criminal lawyer, you worked for the DOJ, didn't you?
I did. I started my career at the Department of Justice. And after I left the Department of Justice, I joined an elite boutique law firm in Seattle where I was a white collar criminal defense lawyer.
But how the hell was that? It is a winding road to be an agent, and in transparency, you're now my agent too, but to be an agent for some people who are like superstars, certainly in the podcast world, but in media generally, that seems to be a million freaking miles away from a white-collar defense lawyer or working for the DOJ, unless, of course, you're running the behind-scenes talent manager for ex-criminals who are now starting a podcast. I know there are those.
Well, criminal law is a good criminal law background. In particular, I was in white-collar criminal law. When I was at the Department of Justice, I supported really one of the most phenomenal white-collar criminal prosecutors in the country who worked on bank fraud. So I was super, super, super low on the totem pole when I was at DOJ. I was just a young punk. And you learn that reading people and understanding what motivate humans to do what they do is not really a big stretch when you're going from criminal law to, and you remember from my background that I didn't go from criminal law to agent. I was a partner in a law firm for years and was outside counsel at great companies like Nintendo and Amazon and AT&T and what became T-Mobile and lots of gaming companies and music companies, and I did music deals. And so there was a little bit of a transition. So what I would say is that we can talk about early childhood stuff if you want, but you learn how to read people. And then what I think I've done is I've built from the foundation of where I started, really as a kid, and my interests and passions. You learn how to build. And so I went from one thing with criminal, definitely very different than being a media lawyer, but not really in terms of the core skill set, which is how do you read people? How do you read situations? And how do you apply your empathy to people and translate that to getting deals done or keeping people out of jail, or in the first instance, helping put people in jail? I think that it's not as big of a leap because ultimately the connective tissue is me and my interest in people and situations. But certainly from a learning standpoint, you have to learn every industry, and every industry is different. But when I went from media lawyer, then I did a startup and a media technology company. And then before I got to this, it's really kind of all built on each other. So it's like a little bit of a snowball.
Well, it's interesting to me because I read your article that you did on negotiation, which I thought was a fabulous article. I talk about the one red thread, that everybody's life has a single red thread that runs through the tapestry of their life. And it's what connects all things. And it's mostly in the background. It's not in the front of the tapestry. It's in the back of the tapestry.
Totally true.
And for me, in the time I've gotten to know you and in our previous conversations and looking at all the things you've done, that one red thread, I would say, is a curiosity, not just a general curiosity, because I think that's certainly there, but it's this curiosity and this thing you've mentioned before, which is what makes people tick. And at that level, to me, what it seems to be about is when I look at you as a DOJ lawyer or a defense lawyer for white collar or negotiator or any of these things, that connection of curiosity is around understanding, as you said, reading people, which is a psychology trait, reading people. And so when it comes to reading people, I just want to go there for a minute. When you look at talent, using America's Got Talent, there's all these people who are coming up in front of you in some way, shape, or form and giving you this moniker as a Simon Cowell, as in there are people passing by you all the time. What is the intuition for you? What is the, what is that spark that for you that goes, that's talent? It may be in a raw form, and that person doesn't really see it yet, but what is it for you?
Well, when I worked at the Department of Justice, I was a gnat on the ass, really supporting the prosecutors who were doing the frontline work. I was a low-level guy. I was young before I joined a law firm in Seattle doing criminal defense work. But if you're asking for a common theme, I would say that I'm interested in people's stories. It took me a long time, but I've learned that you can't really make assumptions about people and their stories. But I'm always interested in getting under the hood a bit more. And we talk about my childhood and kind of the chaos of that. My childhood, I guess, could best be described as juggling razor blades with my 5 brothers and myself. We came from a kind of a crazy background. And every one of my brothers is hyper successful. But when you learn how to survive early on as a child in traumatic situation, you learn how to negotiate that survival through understanding behavioral patterns in people and how they're going to reactively respond, because you need it. You have to know those things in order to thrive. And so what I learned at the Department of Justice when I was low man on the totem pole, it's great to focus on the things they're doing wrong. But what's also interesting to me is why are they even in that situation? I worked in primarily supporting bank fraud cases. I was only at the Department of Justice for 2 years. You learn that people's stories, their origin stories, like what twisty roads did they get on where they went down this path of committing felonies and stealing people's money and stealing institutional money. You learn that people have a lot of things in common. But what are those forks in the road that led them down other paths? My forks have led to hopefully being productive and accretive and aspirational and curious. Those are the things that motivate me. I'm passionate. I like to get out of bed in the morning, and I don't drink coffee. I get out of bed in the morning thinking about what can I do that's fun.
Right.
Doing fun things with fun people is really fun.
Absolutely.
And it's energizing, right? And being around lots of negativity is de-energizing. So one of the common threads to a longer answer to your question is, what are the amazing things about people?
Right.
And how do you build on those things? And how to avoid people who are not motivating, who are perpetual victims.
Mm-hmm.
You can't survive in the entertainment business as a perpetual victim. No one cares. No one cares enough about you as a human being because you have to garner an audience. And if you're not garnering an audience, there's nothing there. Entertainment is primarily for escape.
Yes.
And information, lots of other things. But people want to know that there's light. And if all you're providing is darkness, you're probably not going to have much of an audience.
There's a lot of different places we can go there, and I want to explore that a little bit. But right here, I want to bring up something you've mentioned, which is your 5 siblings, or 5 of you total, right?
6 boys.
So you got 6 boys, and you said all hyper successful, but all coming from this background that has trauma in it. So one of the things we know about trauma, and I know you've heard me talk about this before, Paul, is that trauma develops hypervigilance in human beings. And hypervigilance looks psychic. So people are like, ooh, you're psychic. And it's like, no, I'm reading things you're not seeing. So I was trained in something called micro cues, which is my ability to look at people and see things that are a momentary flash of a feeling that they may not even be aware of, but it's a lie or whatever it is. I'm trained in that, but I excelled in that because I already knew how to do it because I lived in the insane asylum called my childhood. Right?
Well, I think we lived in the same house then, though.
Right. So when you look at yours with your siblings and you've all become hyper successful, that for me, I know this because of the private work that I do, most people's success is built on an escape from their trauma. Doesn't mean they've dealt with their trauma, and oftentimes it will come back and bite them in the ass if they don't go and deal with it. However, each one of you have gone out and done that. Do you see that connection?
So here's what I've learned in my 50s that I didn't quite figure out earlier. I guess I'm a slow study. You're right. Early childhood traumas for my brothers and me really translated in hyper-vigilant survival skills, hyper-awareness. People ask me all the time, like, hey, you guys must be super competitive. I have 2 brothers who are Olympic class athletes. I have a brother who's a physician. I have a brother who's a PhD. He's been a senior executive at multinational companies, crazy successful people. But people say, oh, you guys must just really have been so competitive with each other as kids. And the answer is no. We were not competitive with each other, other than basic surface stuff, trying to get the front seat of the car. But I think that we all supported each other. Here's what I've learned, though. Achievement is often used as a substitute for self-esteem.
Exactly.
Because society rewards it. Oh, you've made a lot of money. You've made famous people more famous. You've built a real estate empire. You're a venture capitalist. My brother's senior executives at multinational companies, successful physician. I have a brother who's a very senior guy at a publicly traded bank. You look at all those resumes and you look at all the achievement and you think, oh, well, God, these guys have it all figured out. Well, no, shit, we don't have it any more figured out than the next guy. But what we have learned is to survive and achieve.
Right.
And achievement and survival is not the same as being. Being is different than achievement. But in our Western culture, achievement by a metric, you're worth X dollars, you've done these deals, you've gotten this executive position, whatever. Those, at the end of the day, are kind of things. And we are not things. You're kind of past worrying about whether you're going to get a meal or not. So why is it the way we are? And it's easy to look to a metric of achievement and go, look at you, you're good. You've achieved something. That's not really the end game. I joke with people that self-actualization is a journey and not a destination. One of the things I've learned is that we often, and especially in Western culture, look at those metrics of achievement, money, power, whatever, and society goes, oh, he's great, she's great, whatever, they've got it all. But as you deconstruct and unpack your early childhood traumas, you realize that one of the reasons why you've pushed to achievement is because that's your way of controlling your world.
And that's exactly it. It's control.
Yeah, it's controlling your world where you didn't have control. If you get parentified, whatever traumas you've been subjected to as a kid, you don't have a lot of control over that. So to the extent you can develop and evolve skills that reward, where you do have control, then they get rewarded because you get more achievement, more money, more power, more status. It's a total trap. And one of the reasons why I agreed to do this interview, and thank you for inviting me, is that I think it's important to remind ourselves as human beings that being is not the same as achieving.
Being and doing are very different things.
Yeah, being and doing are different things. Doing is great. Being is better. Being and doing together is the magic. If you can make it happen, at the end of the day, happiness, whatever that is, comes from your relationships in life. The more you can have a true love in your friendships and beyond, the more you realize that that is what feels great. You and I are super lucky. I'm a gay guy, you're a straight guy, but we're fortunate to be born into Western culture where we just get a little bit of a head start because we're a couple of white dudes. There are things that we just didn't have to worry about. Even as a gay guy, I didn't have to worry about because most people wouldn't think I was gay. So I didn't get a lot of that discrimination. We hopefully embark on self-examination at some level. We're like, wait a second here, what really matters to me? And we have the luxury of having done a lot of great things. So we can hopefully take some time to think about, wait a second, what really matters to me? And being, I'm learning as I get older, is more important than doing.
So let's just deconstruct this a little bit because I want to give some input, if I may. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
So, of course, the thing to understand is, as we just talked about, very often, as you know, I work with some very incredibly successful people from all kinds of walks and areas. And I'm yet to find somebody with a lot of trauma who is extraordinarily successful, who was not using that as a distraction from the trauma. As you said, oftentimes to have a sense of control. But the distinction is this: by doing all the achievements, you get massive self-esteem. Self-esteem is externalized. It means they applaud you, they recognize you. And this is why the Anthony Bourdains and others of the world who I have a great love for leave the planet voluntarily and suicide, because they're deeply lonely, because their self-worth is shit. They're completely in the toilet where their self-esteem is. And so we on the outside, living in a self-esteem applauding Instagram world, look and go, you've got it all because the accolades are there. But the story of that human being is somewhere back in their formative years that's not been dealt with. So they've got esteem up the yin-yang and the self-worth that's lower than a snake's belly, and they're struggling, and we don't see that. We don't let ourselves see it in ourselves until it's too big. And then the problem is, now if you've got all the self-esteem, if I address this, I look like an idiot. I look like a fraud. So they're running the fraud mentality as well. And so it becomes self-collapsing. I mean, it just caves in on a lot of these people. I see this, and it's very, very, very sad. And so we see these superstars who are deeply, deeply lonely because they never looked at that thing that had propelled them, and is magnificent because it propelled them into having the elite stardom that they have. But now it's giving them, as you said, this moment of pause, which often happens in 50s, but can happen much younger. It happens as you get psychologically as the developmental stage, which is often for men around 50, for women around 42, 43, but happens when you have a trauma. So a new trauma, i.e. I fell off a mountain and got smashed to pieces. I was 32 years old. That death of the identity, it's that moment of trauma where the identity is like, oh, I'm not this. That's the psychological thing. I'm not this. Then who am I? What really matters? What is the purpose is what's important.
No true words have been spoken. And of course, when you're younger, you're just trying to get your footing. You're just trying to survive. And if you come from a traumatic situation, particularly one with no economic stability whatsoever, you just got to work. And then that work is rewarded by society going, oh, look how successful you are.
Exactly.
And you get more money in the bank, you get more accolades, you get awards, whatever. Those are not substitutes for the deeper work and understanding yourself and what makes you tick. You don't want to unwind yourself as a human being. You don't want to be something you're not. And those early experiences helps shape who you are. So you can't go back in time and unring the bell and go, what path would I be on? What path would I have taken had those traumas not occurred? You can't do that. right? You can't go, what's my alternate self look like had those things not happened to me? Because it's impossible to do that because those things did happen. And so it helps shape you. The question is how do you understand how those things shape you? How do you apply being present and empathetic as a human being when you see others struggling with those things? Years ago, I gave a speech about deal making. And my speech was called Anatomy of a Deal.
Okay, so hold on. I'm just going to pause you because I want to get into how you do deals and negotiations, and I want to do it in part 2 of the show. So we're already at the end of part 1 of the show, and I know that you've got these skills for negotiation and doing deals that I think I would venture have come from those childhood skill sets that you had to learn. And that's why I want to get into that in part 2 of the show. So we're going to take a break here right now at the end of part 1. We're going to come back in just one click for part 2. But before we do, Paul, how can people find out more about you and your organization?
Well, I'm not really a big social media person, but you can go to LinkedIn, Paul Anderson, Workhouse Media, but I'm not otherwise active on the former Twitter or anything like that.
We'll certainly post a link to Paul's LinkedIn there, but also we'll give you the link to his company and highlight some of the other articles and such in the show notes. So we'll do all that in part 2 of the show. We're going to come back for more of our delicious conversation with Paul Anderson. He is the CEO of Workhouse Media. Heck of a lot more. We'll be back in just one click. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious. And remember, hit that subscribe button. It matters. It counts.